All right, today I will be talking about The Stolen Bicycle by Ming-Yi and translated, I will get the translator this time, by Darryl Stark. Darryl Sterk, not a Game of Thrones character. And this was a really huge surprise for me because I read, this is another one where it was long listed for the Man Booker International Prize, and that's how I found it. And I ended up looking at the author, and he'd done another book called The Man with the Compound Eyes, and that one sounded more up my alley. So I ended up getting both. I do this sometimes. And I read The Man with the Compound Eyes, and it's been a while, so it's difficult for me to remember my exact feelings on it, other than that I remember almost nothing about it. And I remember just kind of finishing it and going, okay. It wasn't really like great. It wasn't really bad. It was just kind of there, and in many ways, that's kind of the worst things a book can be. Any kind of art. So I had no interest in really getting to The Stolen Bicycle at all. But like I said, most of my books are packed. This was one that I had put in the potentially donate pile. I wasn't planning on taking this one back, and holy hell, am I glad that I got to read this again, because just what a fantastic book. The book is very similarly structured to the Wind Up Bird Chronicle, and I know I usually say or try to avoid bringing up Murakami in my reviews because I do it a lot, but this time it's so fitting that I'm stunned that there aren't more comparisons between these books, because what you have in this book is a young Taiwanese young male, who is setting out to try and find his father's bicycle. His father disappeared one day from their family without a word, and he took his bicycle with him. So you have this main character who is trying to find a family member via this thing that is symbolic of their relationship. So in this book, it's son, father, bicycle. In Wind Up Bird Chronicle, it's husband, wife, cat. And along the way, it really features the through line of the main character in this quest, but then the subtext through the whole story is all the people that he encounters who give their own stories and events and histories, mostly doing it via the backdrop of World War II, and how either they relate to World War II or how their own families are directly related to World War II. So in terms of structure, in terms of setup, and in terms of the way it tackles the war and many of the themes, I shouldn't say like many of the like it touches on some of the same themes in terms of the war. The other themes are actually very different, but just the parallels are so obvious, even down to some of the subtle magical realist elements, but they're way more subdued in The Stolen Bicycle compared to like Murakami's work. But it gave me like some of the things, some, not all. Again, like I said, they are still distinct works, but it gave me some of the same enjoyment as Wind Up Bird Chronicle, but also the details about bikes and the history of bikes, and the way that the history of bikes relative to East Asia, and how important they were both in World War II and to the people there early on, like when a bike was a status symbol. To get that kind of history was really fascinating. And the book actually has 7 sections that are just bike notes that don't have a whole lot. They do tie a little bit into the main story, but they're mostly just the history of certain bikes and models of bicycles. And even as somebody who's not really into bikes, it's clear from the details, not just the passion that the author has that gets you into it, but for me, being really interested in East Asian history as I am, just getting more details, even on the sort of history of manufacturing of bikes in this area, is something that I hugely enjoyed. So in terms of to whom would I recommend this book, anybody with an interest in East Asian history, anybody with an interest in Taiwanese history, anybody who likes bikes, And as ever, anybody interested in a good story, particularly like I will never like I love Japanese fiction so much. My favorite writer is Japanese. A lot of my favorite books are Japanese. I came and presently live, but only for a few months longer, in Japan because I'm so inspired by it. But in terms of the fictional world, it really does feel like it's easy to find Japanese stories, but some other countries don't have the same translation privileges. And even as I'm somebody who would like a broader variety of Japanese fiction to be translated, because like I've said in the past, it's so limited, to get more Taiwanese fiction, to get more South Korean fiction, to get more Chinese fiction or Vietnamese fiction is huge. And especially like I can guarantee you I'm going to go back and reread The Man with the Compound Eyes. But even if I don't enjoy it as much, the fact that this came afterwards and I cannot wait to read another of this writer's novels, but it might be a while because this was translated like 2017. Yeah. So it's been almost 10 years without a novel release translation from this writer, though I guess a work of his nonfiction is going to be translated recently, but that doesn't really do it for me. So, we need to show more love and support for translation works outside of kind of these core, really popular areas for translation. So if you like Japanese translated fiction, then give this a shot just to try something outside of your comfort zone a little bit. So getting into the pros and cons. In terms of the pros, like I said, I really enjoyed the history and the fact that it gives you an insight into something that, at least for me in the West, I'd never even thought of, the importance of bikes and its importance to Taiwanese culture and East Asian culture, or even how it would have been integrated into warfare. It never crossed my mind. And if one of the great things about fiction is that it can change the way that you look at the world by giving you new perspectives, then this book just absolutely fucking nailed it, because it took something that's so everyday that I never even question it and gave it such a rich history and such a big background. And it did so, what I really like is that it did so without falling back on some of the old tropes that kind of tend to be universal. Like, I know there's a difference between like a lot of manga and anime and literature, so I'm not saying that it's like this, but for me, that there was this moment when I was watching, I don't remember the name of it, but it was some anime about diving. And the way that they were describing diving and how like it's a portal to a brand new world or whatever, it made me realize that like, any sports story, you could just copy and replace diving with anything. Baseball, it's a team sport, it's a gateway to a whole new world. Soccer, whatever. Any sports story, the sport can be pretty much interchangeable to a lot of the emotions that are being played or being shown at hand. And I think, again, sticking with anime, there was like Your Lie in April, at which point I realized that, wait a minute, this is just a sports anime, but with music instead. And it really changed the way that I look at a lot of things. And nowadays, whenever I see things romanticized, like music or art or even writing, any sport, whatever, there's certain generic tropes where really what it all comes down to is passion. And it's not a passion driven by the thing in particular so much as it is a passion to create, a passion to express, just a passion to find something that gives your life meaning. That this is more, the sport, the art, whatever it is the catalyst for it, more so than it is necessary to telling the story that you want to tell. Or really, like, based on, like, you can just cut and paste anything in there. Like I said, your diving anime could have just as easily been an anime about music, and you could keep the script and just tweak, Control F, diving, replace with piano, and then hit enter, and you're good to go. And again, it's not that I'm hammering on manga or anime or whatever. This is a universal thing in storytelling. I've seen it a lot in Western stories. I've seen it a lot in manga and anime, and it's something that annoys me. So when I say that this book is not only a passion project about bicycles, it's about bicycles in a way that is so unique to bicycles and the history of bicycles and how that history ties into the cultural history of the place, that it's really not just, you can't control F bicycles in this book and replace it with like hot rods and have it have the same impact or the same effect. So in that sense, like, yeah, you can with a lot of the collector's attitude that he talks about in here, but as a whole, I think that it really stands out in that sense, to be very unique, to be very about bicycles, and to integrate them justifiably, to try, explain the cultural significance, even going down to the different words for bicycle and preferences for them. And on top of that, the translation, I think, is really interesting. I'm not a translator, but reading that, it contains two notes in the back, one from the author and one from the translator, which go into a lot of the details of the language of Taiwan and how it as an island, which has gone through so many shifts and changes, has such a complication of languages. And I don't say complication in a bad way, just certain languages have come, left behind their mark, been altered, been changed. There was Japanese rule, there was Chinese rule, there's Hungarian, or not Hungarian, Mandarin. And then you have kind of the native languages of the natives to the area, indigenous, that's the word I'm looking for, the indigenous people. So, and the book is really trying to balance all of these different languages in a way that does respect to each of them. And I really appreciated that and thought it was interesting. And to see that attempt to be in some way captured in the English translation is something I also appreciate, especially since it was a very easy book to read. Obviously, like, I talk about prose a lot, but I think that the book in particular, going back to what I was saying kind of about bicycles and adding another layer to that, this is a book with a lot of spiritualism to it. Which is another thing that I would say kind of similar to Murakami, but much more natural spiritualism rather than existential spiritualism. Although there is still existential spiritualism, it's just really wrapped up in more of this rebirth of life and death and the relationship of death and nature and man's relationship with nature, which is a thematic thing. But I really, what I'm talking about in this particular section is there's a tendency to get really like emotional. I have to think about what word I'm going to say here, so I'm going to take a second because my throat is getting dry anyway. All right, the word sentimental. There's, when you're talking about naturalism and preserving nature, there's a tendency for preservationists to get really sentimental, to try to appeal to emotions over everything else. And again, it's a scale. There is no like, oh, you're sentimental, oh, you're rational. It's a scale. And I feel like this book struck a really nice balance between really making you feel sympathetic for the animals in war, or the damage that it causes on the environment, and the way in which people live with the environment and the environment impacts them. Like, it may not be front and center, but there's, it's almost like, rather than saying that there's an explicit environmental theme, it was a book written by an environmentalist where it is obviously important to the writer, and so it just appears in the story as a constant, subtle through line that constantly makes you think about it without ever directing your attention to it or saying anything or getting overly sentimental about it. And I think it's the avoidance of the super sentimental aspects, or maybe I should say a more accurate way of putting it, and this is kind of just the overall pro of the book, is it's sentimental without relying exclusively on sentimentality, because it feels like it's not just trying to appeal to your emotions, it's also backing it up with stories and demonstrations, and like in the case of bikes, some of the facts, to where it's telling a story, not just trying to make you feel some sort of explicit end goal, or like I said, just relying on cheap commonalities and universal sentimentalities. Like, this is a book, even though it is about war, but it's specifically about a type of warfare, the way it affects a certain type of people. It's a war specifically in a specific area. And even as somebody who hates war stories, because I feel like I've read them all before, it's the way that it uses the war stories to define the present and how people live on with war in the present, which, again, another thing that it borrows from. Not that it borrows, but that draws similarities with Wind Up Bird to me. So I've listed the pros. Like I said, easily readable, easily fascinating, nice. Easily readable. I find the history fascinating. I think the story and the characters are really compelling. It has a nice pathos, but it doesn't rely too heavily on it. It has a nice balance to all that stuff. I think the pacing is really nice. The nice thing about having all the different short stories is that you're never with any one thing for too long. It doesn't feel like it kind of drags before you're on to something else. In terms of the cons, and man, it's kind of rough for me to think of a con, because even in terms of the length, like, it's not a very long book either. It's 368 pages of decently spaced out text, and there's just no flab to it. It's really quite good. I'm not saying it's perfect. I can think of really, 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 really small things that I can bring up and say, well, it's weird that, say, for example, in the beginning, there's this story of how his father almost takes his fifth sister and gives her away. And the fifth sister is explicitly named. So you'd think that, given the time that this story has taken up, and the fact that she has a name, that this would come up later on, or that she would be a major character or anything. But by the time she comes up again, it's literally right at the very end, and I don't think she just doesn't ever even actually show up as a character in the whole story. So that's kind of a bit weird, but my problems are such nitpicky things like that. So on the whole, I don't really have any major issues with this book. Nothing that I would feel like is a con enough that I would have to bring up. One last pro before I move on to the themes, because this is the pettiest pro ever, but the cover is absolutely gorgeous. And if I'm understanding correctly from the inside, I believe he actually did the cover himself, because let me see here. Copyright, Ming-Yi, translation copyright, cover copyright. Book design based on the original edition, cover and internal illustrations by Wu Ming-Yi, who is the author. So unless I'm misunderstanding this, the author did the cover, and it's absolutely gorgeous, and that's worthy of recognition to me. All right, so let's move into themes here, and once again, there's a lot of them. So I'm just going to pick out a few of the major ones, usually the ones that I've already discussed in the review a bit, and go into a bit more detail here. So I think that one of the biggest themes, and I'm struggling as to whether or not this is an explicit theme or not, because I feel like it's really, really explicit, but it might just be really because it's something I also think about. But the amount of history behind everyday objects, not necessarily everyday, but every object, but specifically the everyday objects that we use in our life, and the stories associated with them. Because whether it's the main character, whether it's his collector friend Apu, whether it's Abda, I'm drawing a blank on his name, but every single person in this story, while it is in some way has a history with this bicycle, or in some way has a history with a bicycle. But then whether it's the main character or the other characters, it's the way that when they go and they collect things, they're as much collecting stories as anything else. And the author actually mentions this in the part after the book, which usually I don't like to include the author's thoughts, but I think in this case I am going to bring it up because the becoming a collector of a bicycle over these bicycles and getting people's stories is something that he mentions, and it's really incorporated well into the book. And the way that the book highlights the histories in these objects, in these everyday things, and the way that the objects can go on and carry and give meaning to things and people really is just central. And I think in a way like what the whole book is all about, because the bike is not just a bike. It's the last thing that he has of his father. It's his memory of his father. And, come the end of the book, whether it's true or not, and, given the, like I said, heightened realism of the rest of the book, it's as likely to be true as untrue. He has a vision of his father leaving the bike behind and walking into the ocean in a form of self-oblivion, which suggests that, whether it really happened or not, he has accepted that his father will never come back, likely committed suicide, and what he has to remember him by is this bike. And the bike isn't just his father's bike, but as he mentions, it's come back, and it's like a completely different vehicle because it's taken on the properties and the essences and the stories of all the people that it's been passed around and passed through. And I think this is interesting, especially from, like I said, it has such an environmentalist message to it. There's, like I said, a not just a story of rebirth, but man and man's relationship with nature, whether it's the story of the old man and the bird, who he believes is a reincarnated pilot, the story of the tree growing and the bike being tangled in the tree, like somebody buries a bike, and then years later, his son goes back and tries to dig up this bike, only for the bike to have become gnarled in this tree, which grew out of the ground, which I think is a really beautiful image. Or the people who made their last stand in the tree. Like, there's a lot of relationship between man and nature in this book, but and where it would be really easy to go sentimental and talk about all the damage that mankind does, I think that whether it's intentional or not, and this one I'm going to actually lean towards probably not intentional, and this is just my takeaway from it, but we come into this age of planned obsolescence, where we use things and we throw them away so quickly that old things we often don't want, and we just discard them without using them. But if we can come to appreciate the history behind these things, then not only does it give us a greater attachment to the things and a greater attachment to our histories, but it also has the side effect or the consequence that we hold on to things longer, that we don't throw away things as well, that we make better uses of our resources, which we are very lucky and fortunate to have enough resources at the moment that we're able to act the way we do and behave the way that we do. And even then, it's very, very arguable that we're doing irreparable damage to the earth and whatnot, and that in fact we don't actually have the luxury. But I'm just talking about in terms of like physically right now it's happening, and it's nice in the sense that we're able to do it. We are literally capable of doing it. But at what cost? At what consequence? Not just in the sense of the environmental damage, but also the historical relevancy, and the attachment that we have, not just to the objects, but what the objects represent in terms of culture. I talk about culture a lot and bicycles and their attachment to culture, and this is another big theme because in the history of bikes, they talk about how the very first bikes that kind of came in to Korea, or Taiwan rather, were the oh god, well, what was it? It was the Fuji Monarch, which is based off of Rudge, an English bicycle. So it was Japanese, and eventually, when it came to making Taiwanese bicycles, this one of the first companies was called Lucky, and their slogan was "Ride your way to luck." So not only was it a point of like bicycles being important to the story, but the national pride of being able to make your own bikes to support your sort of local economy and local thing, whatnot. But even the slogan he mentions as being a huge part and of Lucky's success. And one of the things that you will find throughout the book is the sort of cultural question of identity between like the Japanese and the Chinese, and how Taiwan, and the natives, and how Taiwan gets kind of caught in the middle. And I like that the way that, like I said, it's not like directly tied to the bicycles so much as the history of the bicycles is in a way a sort of byproduct of this competition. And watching the evolution of the history of bicycles, along with, like, for example, you have the one person's father who burned everything because he served for the Japanese and eventually ended up killing himself. You have the one older woman whose father, when she was really, really young, could never get another job after the war because even though he was Taiwanese, he worked for the Japanese government. He wasn't like a soldier or anything. He just worked for the provisional government. But that was enough of a stain on his history that going forward, he wasn't able to get another job. And you have a lot of native, indigenous, that's the word again, conversations, about that and that kind of identity, be it with the butterfly trade or be it with the hunters of the one individual who actually, this is kind of an interesting twist because he was actually an indigenous person who then their indigenous tribe actually were fairly sympathetic to the Japanese before everything started to get really strict with the war. They talk about like the history of going up to the mountain and coming down, and how the Japanese were one of their the lost three tribes that went up the mountain, and they were one of them. So it's really just interesting to, like I said, see it as a byproduct, as an extension of what is ultimately going on in the whole story in this quest for not just natural identity, but a self-understanding and understanding of history and understanding of your past. That is central to the theme of the novel. Like I said, not just in terms of understanding the main character, but also understanding his relationship to his father and his relationship to the broader of Taiwan and his kind of place in the world, because he is very kind of loosely floating through it. And he mentions at the end, questioning whether or not they ever really grew up. And one of the things that I think kind of ties this, like I said, dealing with war, dealing with the way that the book deals with war, ties it really closely to the Wind Up Bird Chronicle, is you have these soldiers in both of them who are left so deeply scarred by the nature of war. And one of the things that I really like about both of these stories, Wind Up Bird Chronicle and this, and maybe this is another reason that the story really speaks to me, is that it's not just a question of a story about war, but it's a question of how the generation that experienced the war tries to communicate and interact with the generation that comes after. And this is where, going back to like The Shadow of the Wind, I feel like The Shadow of the Wind touches briefly on these subjects, but does not dive into them to anywhere near the degree of Wind Up Bird Chronicle or The Stolen Bicycle. And again, not to reopen a conversation about The Shadow of the Wind in a review for a different book, but where in The Shadow of the Wind, it was kind of just set dressing to this larger adventure. Here, it's really like the center of the book. It's one of the core themes. And a lot of these older people, this older generation in The Stolen Bicycle, but I don't remember. I don't think it happens. It's mentioned in Wind Up Bird Chronicle, but it might be with a side, like somebody mentioned somebody else having done it. But they end up unable to live with the younger generation, where you have the kid. Sorry, I keep coughing and my throat is getting super dry, so I'm going to have to wrap this up here soon. But you have the protagonist in this story who talks about, at the end of it, his sort of childishness and not appreciating the sacrifices that some of the older generation gave, not being able to understand them, or not even trying to understand them or relate to them, which he mentions... oh God, let me sort of standing by and watching rather than trying to really get in to dig with them, to understand with them, and instead passing judgment on them. But at the same time, from the older generation who experienced the war, he mentions that it's like they had thorns in their bodies, but when it came to some of the ones that mattered most, rather than pulling them out, they pushed them in too deep, which is really where the sort of tragedies, the things that you witness, and the person that you become something that when you do get to peacetime, when the world does move on and does rebuild, how do you reintegrate in that, having seen what you've seen, having become what you've become? Because absolutely, wartime pushes you to the extreme, pushes you to become something else. And we know from like PTSD and things like that once you cross that line, it's really, really difficult for a lot of people, in many cases even impossible, to come back. So really what you've got are these two generations, the generation that pushed themselves and became something that no human should ever have to become, in order to create a world where their offspring never have to become that, but in the same way, almost never have to appreciate the sacrifices that they made, that were made for them to become that. Kind of, not, I don't want to say rest on their laurels, but that there is a sense of entitlement there. And, on the one hand, it's great that they have the luxury to be entitled, that it is a peacetime, but on the other hand, without appreciating what came before, how can you prevent it from happening again? And I love seeing that generational conflict play out this way, in a way that shows respect and understanding for both sides, and these struggles, and shows really sympathy for everyone involved. So like I said, my throat is dry. I've been coughing quite a bit, so I'm going to wrap this up here. I really, really enjoyed this book. I could keep rambling on for a long time about it. Please, please, please read it. Join me next time.